I tell myself it's just my imagination, a trick of the mind, but deep down, I know better. My husband, Matthew, has always been a restrained, calm, collected person who never lets his emotions get the better of him. But lately, he's been different. His silence heavier, his gaze sharper, as if he's searching for answers he already knows. The tension has been building for days, hanging over our quiet moments, but it all came to a head on what should have been just another night like any other. Everything was as usual. The sound of plates clattering, the warm aroma of dinner filling the air. But underneath it all, there was an indescribable sense of unease. Matthew sat opposite me, his movements precise, his posture rigid. He hardly touched his food, but he wasn't the only one. We were both haunted by an unspoken truth, and I felt it too. Our son Ethan was blissfully unaware, excitedly talking about his day at school. His laughter was pure and flawless, like a fleeting beam of light cutting through the tension before disappearing into the increasingly dense air. For just a moment, everything returns to normal, and then Matthew speaks. Evelyn, he says my name, and that's all, but the way he says it makes me shudder. His voice is steady, but there's something strange behind it. We need to talk. My stomach cramps. There's not a hint of tenderness in his tone, not an invitation to idle chatter, but a statement, rather than a request. My throat tightens, but I force myself to nod, to answer affirmatively, to try to appear indifferent, even though the slight tremor in my voice betrays me. Matthew leans back in his chair, crosses his arms over his chest, and glances at me with eyes that flicker briefly, tender and hesitant before becoming firm again. I've been wondering, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. About us, about our family. A nervous smile appeared on his face, although it felt as fragile as glass, ready to shatter at any moment. I asked the question, although I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the answer. I wasn't sure I wanted an answer, but instead of responding immediately, he reached for the drawer next to him, moving slowly and deliberately. When he held his hand out again, he was holding a manila envelope, which he placed wordlessly on the table between us. At the sight of it, a chill ran up my spine. What is this? I asked in a low voice, my pulse racing. Matthew's expression. Opening it, I hesitate, my fingers trembling as they lightly touch the edge of the envelope. It's heavier than I expected, as if carrying the weight of irreversibility. Slowly, almost reluctantly, I pull out the papers inside, my breath catching in my throat. The paternity test results. The writing is blurry, my vision blurred by the tears that haven't dried yet. I don't need to read them. The truth is already there, written all over Matthew's face. Ethan is not my son, is he? Matthew's voice was steady, but it carried an icy breath I had never heard before. It was the voice of someone who already knew the answer, but who still clung to a faint hope that he was wrong. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My breathing was shallow, and the sound of my heartbeat deafening in my ears, drowning out everything else. Answer me, Evelyn, he demanded, his tone as sharp as a knife edge. I deserve the truth. Tears blur my vision and run down my cheeks. In front of Syl, I find the right words. But how do you explain an unforgivable act? How do you erase the betrayal etched on his face? Matthew, it's not what you think, I whispered, barely audible. He let out a bitter laugh, without humor, and it pierced me like broken glass. It's not what I think. Then explain it to me, Evelyn. Explain it. His hand gestured towards the document, which I still held in a shaking grip. This is irrefutable evidence. I can no longer escape it. I lowered my head and stared at the pages as if hoping the words would change, but they remained unchanged, ruthlessly tearing apart the world I had done my best to hold together. I had made a mistake. I choked, my voice weak. He repeated it, his eyes closed in disbelief. You let me believe that Ethan was my son for 6 years. 6 years. Evelyn, you let me love him, raise him, give him everything I had, and now you're telling me it was a mistake. The pain in his voice was unbearable, and each syllable cut like a knife into my heart. He has lost faith in me. I didn't want it to turn out like this. I pleaded, desperation building in my throat. I thought it didn't matter. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. His hands clenched into fists. His composure was fading with the explosion of emotion. His pent-up feelings were finally beginning to break free, but it wasn't the case. Evelyn, he suddenly raised his voice. Things are much more important than you think. A small voice interrupted our quarrel. Mom, Dad, what's wrong? Ethan's innocent eyes dart back and forth between us, his little face full of concern. Matthew's expression softens, if only for a moment, and when he turns to our son, he says gently, Buddy, go to your room, okay? Mom, I need to talk to Ethan. Ethan hesitates, his gaze flicking between us. He senses the tension, which not even a child can ignore, but after a moment he nods and disappears down the hall. His footsteps faded away, leaving us alone in the suffocating silence. Matthew turned back to us, his face rigid once again. I've suspected him for some time, he admitted, his voice low but full of something primal, secret phone calls late at night, pointless trips. But I wanted to believe you. I wanted to trust you, so I put all those suspicions behind me. Matthew, please, I whispered, walking towards him and reaching out to take him by the hand. No, his tone was firm and resolute, and he backed away, not to come any closer. You had 6 years to explain, Evelyn, 6 years to tell me the truth. But instead, you lied to me every single day. He reached for the other things on the table, another file, bank statements, and then he held up our joint account coldly and said, I've frozen them. My stomach dropped. You can't. You can't do this, I exclaimed. Oh, I can, he replied, his voice like ice. I did it. You can't spend any more of my money. Panic washed over me as my carefully constructed world fell apart, and everything I'd been through felt like a heavy weight pressing down on me, like sand slipping through my fingers. As for the man you met, Jack, wasn't it Matthew? He gave a bitter smile, and I was sure he was finished. I held my breath. What do you mean? I asked, fear creeping into my voice. I told his boss everything. Matthew shrugged as if nothing had happened. The affair, the paternity test results, every detail. He won't be working anytime soon. Matthew, please, I begged, my voice hoarse. Don't do this, he shook his head, a mixture of hurt and anger, love and disgust in his expression. You did this, Evelyn, not me. He let out a sharp breath, as if trying to calm himself. You made your choices. Now face the consequences. He pushed his chair back sharply, a sharp scraping sound cutting through the air. When he spoke again, his voice was much softer but no less devastating. I'm filing for divorce first thing tomorrow. He hesitated, a hint of tenderness flickering across his face. Love always, Ethan. He's innocent in all this, but you'll have to fend for yourself. And then he was gone, the door slamming behind him, the sound echoing around the house, leaving an emptiness I'd never known before. For a long time, I sat there, motionless, staring at the spot where he had stood, trying to deal with the mess I had created. But before I could fully understand what had happened, I heard small, timid footsteps approaching. Mum, Ethan. The voice was small and uncertain. Is everything okay? I quickly wiped my face and forced a smile, feeling hollow inside. It's okay, honey. Don't worry. When I wrapped my arms around him, reality hit me like a tidal wave. I had betrayed the man who loved me. I had destroyed the trust that held our family together. And worst of all, I had hurt the innocent child who depended on me. The life I had taken for granted was gone forever, replaced only by emptiness.